Hi, Joseph. Can you hear me?
I can, James. Yes. Let me just come out of my email. Otherwise, we'll get. Is this audio or audio visual?
Audio visual.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just want to actually come out of my email because if I receive emails, you'll hear the ping.
Yes.
Uh,
Sure
Let me
thing.
get rid of that. And that should be the only thing that's likely to make a noise.
Mhm.
All right.
Great. Great to meet you. And
Yes.
thanks
Good
for
to
today.
meet you. Well,
Yeah,
you're in Denmark, yes?
that's right. I'm in a town called Randers, which is just outside of Aarhus. So biggest town or biggest city on the Jutland Peninsula in Denmark. I've been here now
Okay.
for about 5 years. So
Okay. Is it permanent or as permanent as anything can be?
yeah, really, Lord knows,
Right.
because
Right.
just finishing up the masters, and it will really depend on the direction my career takes me, and of course where the Lord wants us. But I met my Danish wife in London about 6 years ago, and
Okay.
decided to move over here, learn the language, get to know her culture a little bit better, and also after about 7 years in London, I was looking for a bit of a break. So
Oh yeah, yeah. I've had out to here to London by the time I was in my late twenties. So you and I are
exactly,
the same path there. So
yeah.
where are you from in England originally?
I was born in Nottingham. My
Okay,
dad is from Yorkshire, and my mum's family is from Australia, and that's kind of by way of London, or London by way of Australia, however you'd put it. Um, but yeah, we kind of grew up in a lot of different places. I actually grew up in the States for about 5 years. So
oh
we're
really?
in
Where about?
Maryland.
Whereabouts?
In Maryland,
Maryland.
funnily enough,
Okay.
yeah.
So
Um,
was your father working in DC or something then?
he was working in I think it was called NUH, a National University Hospital or something like that.
Okay.
He's a doctor. So we moved to a few different places: Singapore, Saudi Arabia. So when I speak about England, I have a real sort of strong national feeling, but I don't really think of myself as having a hometown, so to speak.
Right, because you're on the move all the time.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah, yeah. But yeah, I do miss it a lot. I can tell you that, and I'm sure it's kind of the same for you. You've probably not been back in quite a while, hey, because of the
Well,
lockdown.
not since pre-COVID, obviously.
Yeah.
The last time I was in Europe, I went to Budapest early December of 2019.
Mhm.
Then I was due to lead a pilgrimage to England last year. I can't remember exactly when, and
Mm.
that was cancelled because of COVID. And then it was rescheduled for this March and cancelled again, and it's now
Wow.
rescheduled for I think March 2023 at this stage.
Okay.
But I've got another pilgrimage I'm leading in September of next year. So that's next scheduled return. But if
Mm.
things clear up and it's not too much of a mess, I might try to get back sometime this year just to see friends
Mm.
and family.
Yeah, 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 yeah. And I can really understand that. I miss mine. My daughter, well, my second daughter was born in October, and my parents still haven't met her yet. So except
No,
over Zoom and Skype and all of that. So
right, yeah, that's the crazy times in which we live. But yeah,
yeah,
I've never been this long away from England
yeah.
as currently, which I imagine is something like 2 years and counting, well, almost 2 years and counting.
Yeah, yeah. But I guess South Carolina's treating you well.
Yeah,
Is
America's
it
treated me
South
well
Carolina?
generally. It is South Carolina. When we moved to the States, my wife's American. I met my wife
Okay.
in Oxford.
Yeah.
And then she moved to England when we got married, but we were only there for 4 months before I was offered the job in the States to teach at Ivy
Right.
Marian University. And then
Yeah.
I was in Michigan for 2.5 years, didn't like it, too cold. Uh, and then we were in Southwest Florida for 3 years, didn't like that, too hot. So I sometimes call South Carolina the sort of the Goldilocks states,
Yeah.
neither too hot, nor too cold, just right. So
Yeah.
we've got 2.5 acres of land, looking out the window at the duck pen and the duck pond that I built, and we've got trees.
Wonderful.
So this is a little corner of a foreign field that is forever home, shall we say? I was going to say it's forever England, but I might
Yeah.
be going too
Excellent.
far. But I have found a little corner here that feels like home, and that does assuage the sense of exile somewhat.
Yes. Yeah, I get that a lot. I mean, my wife and I, we were thinking, or primarily I was thinking that once we've got enough money set aside, I'd love to build like an oak beamed house. Just because, okay, if we're going to live in Denmark, then I'm sure we can compromise on maybe a bit more of an English style home. because to me that's one of the things I miss. It's the English houses in the countryside.
English villages are quintessentially unique and very special, and the English landscape, country landscape, and the big cities stink, but that's true of most big cities. So
absolutely, I'm with you there. But yeah, as I said before, thanks a lot for today. It's great to be able to talk to you. Something which I believe I communicated earlier is that I'm sort of on my way into the Catholic faith at the moment. It's been quite a long process. I'm currently taking lessons, but my youngest daughter's been baptized a Catholic, but I was baptized an Anglican. I believe you were as well.
I was baptized an Anglican, but we never practiced. It was just, what I sometimes say is that, that it was a mark of not being a complete barbarian that you got your children christened. But after that, no one ever went to church. So,
I understand.
So, well, that's good news. So you're on the path.
Exactly.
By the grace of God, the path to Rome, as Hilaire Belloc would say. So, do you have a date for your reception to the church? Are you still sort of working on that?
Yeah, I believe it will be sometime in the summer, so not so long away.
Well, I will add you to my daily prayers so that you've got a little bit of extra support on the final approach, so to speak.
I appreciate that a lot. Thanks. So, and the man in the picture behind you was a big help in leading me on that path as well. Same as John. So basically, you made a video with KV Turley about Walsingham.
I did. Yes.
And I saw that. I think it was about a year ago, and I watched it again this morning. And so some of the references from that video are still kind of fresh in my mind. So, but basically, with that in mind, Chesterton and John Henry Newman were really big influences on my path.
Well, I always say that under grace, Chesterton's the biggest influence. Obviously give God the glory, so under grace, but under grace, Chesterton was easily the most important influence in my conversion. That's why I've got him looking over my shoulder. He's still keeping an eye on me, right?
Yeah, I understand that. So I suppose maybe I'll just get into some of the questions.
Ready when you are. Yeah.
We can see where it goes from there. But yeah, I'm also looking forward to asking you a bit about your book, because it sounds right up my alley. And
you mean the new book, the one's coming out later this year?
Exactly. Yeah, that's the one.
Yeah. When we spoke, I may have mentioned to you that it was due to be published in the spring, but they've actually the squeaky hinge gets the oil, perhaps. But they've brought it forward. It should be out in November, so not quite so long in the future.
Fantastic. Was it Ignatius Publishing?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Okay, I spoke recently with Sally Reed. I don't know if you've come across her.
Yeah, the poet.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah. So, we met in. I think we might have met in Walsingham. I know I'm getting confused. I know we've met and we've emailed quite a bit.
Yeah, right. So of course, with Walsingham being connected with the Annunciation, she also seemed like an obvious choice to speak with.
Yeah, I think actually it's possible that I've seen her video on Walsingham, and I'm now conflating that with the belief that I met her there, which may not be the case, in fact.
Kindred spirits, perhaps, Yeah. Anyway, I'll get into the questions. The first one is, Joseph, could you tell me a little bit about yourself?
Yes, well, I'm a native of England, born 60 long years ago now, and it's beginning to feel like it. But I've been in the States since 2001. I actually moved here 4 days before 9/11, so September the 7th, 2001. So I've been here now for almost 20 years.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. I was a full-time writer in England for 5 years, and then moved over here and taught at college level for about 16 years. But at the moment, I'm director of book publishing at Augustine Institute. So I'm still doing online teaching for various entities.
Sure.
But I'm not part of a college faculty at the moment.
Right. Yeah, sure. Okay. And in terms of your relationship with Walsingham, could you describe that, please?
Yes, well, I after living a very dissolute youth, in 1988, at the age of 27, I needed to escape the madness and mayhem and maelstrom of London. and relocated to Norwich in Norfolk. And the following year, 1989, I was received into the church. But I discovered Walsingham basically as soon as I moved to Norwich in 1988. So I had been cycling there. I was a very keen cyclist when I lived in England, and I would cycle out to Walsingham many weekends during the pilgrimage season, between Easter and the autumn. And Walsingham, and of course specifically Our Lady of Walsingham, was a key component in getting me over the finishing line as regards entering the church. So I developed very early, before I even became a Catholic, a devotion to Our Lady of Walsingham, and I retain that obviously to this day.
Yeah, I understand that. Great. And would you associate, therefore, any particular spiritual practices with Walsingham?
Well, bearing in mind that the whole Catholic thing, so to speak, was new to me, the shrine at Walsingham, the Slipper Chapel, especially, of course, the Catholic shrine, baptized my Catholic imagination in many ways. And in other words, that I was shaped in my earliest times as a neophyte into the practice of faith by regular, frequent pilgrimages to the Slipper Chapel and to Walsingham generally. It was also very important because, like many converts to the faith, the two things that I had a hang up about until the very last moment was the position of the papacy and the position of the Blessed Virgin. These are sort of knee-jerk Protestant bigoted bullet points, so to speak. So obviously, discovering Walsingham and going there regularly, and the Marian devotion that's obviously attached to the place, I see it as a sort of a healing process. It was like a balm, a spiritual balm that healed any remaining anti-Marian prejudice, and actually, on the contrary, made me absolutely gung-ho. I think, as Chesterton said, that anything I might say on the subject of the Mother of God will be tainted with enthusiasm.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. So so you were deeply affected by Walsingham as a pilgrimage site, as in terms of its Marian devotion. This is a question I've not actually asked of anyone yet, and that's is Walsingham, is it typically associated with any particular form of the Mass? For example, Latin Rite or the New Mass, or just bring together a lot of different expressions?
Yeah, I would say actually that it's Novus Ordo. I don't know that I've ever, of course, this is before the motu proprio, but I'm not aware of there being any particular Latin, traditional Mass aspect to the shrine. It was always Novus Ordo when I went there back in the 80s. But that in those days, the traditional Mass was sort of had been confined and exiled to the fringes. That's no longer the case, thanks to Pope Benedict XVI, of course.
Right. Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. And you've described with KV Turley, I believe, Walsingham as the heart of Catholic England. And I wanted to ask if you could explain the importance of Walsingham to English Catholicism.
Yeah, I mean, basically, Our Lady of Walsingham is literally the heart of English Catholicism, in the sense that the whole devotion to England as Our Lady's dowry rose out of the devotion to Our Lady of Walsingham, and because of the effort to smother the Catholic identity of England in the sort of 300 years following the Reformation. The Englishmen are ignorant of this fact, but Walsingham was the premier Marian shrine in the whole of Christendom, and people travelled to Little Walsingham, to the shrine in Little Walsingham, from all over Europe, and we think of the Walsingham Way as being from London to Walsingham, and indeed that is a Walsingham Way. But many people that visit Walsingham would have arrived by sea, perhaps to places like Yarmouth, and actually walked from Norwich because that would have been the most direct route from the continent. So there's this other Walsingham Way that sort of seems largely forgotten. So, you know, so if you look, and I read somewhere, I can't quote the statistics, but the proportion of Anglican, what are now Anglican churches, Catholic churches built in the Middle Ages, Norman churches, late Saxon churches, dedicated to St. Mary the Virgin, is actually far higher than is the norm for the dedication of churches in other parts of Christendom. In other words, this is empirical evidence that the English had a specifically deep devotion to the Blessed Virgin, and that has a great deal, of course, to do with the apparition of Our Lady at Walsingham in 1061 and its emergence during the Middle Ages as a major international shrine to the Blessed Virgin.
Yes, right. I'm sure you've heard about the Dowry Tour, which was a part of the rededication efforts, where the statue of Our Lady traveled to lots of different cathedrals. I saw that one of the exhibition panels, because there was also an exhibition discussing Marian devotion, it showed all of the different shrines across England, and England is really dotted with them. You know, you could almost like a map of all the cities in England. There's a map of all the shrines in England, and it's really quite impressive.
An important book for me in my research for my new book, which is the History of Catholic England, was a book called Shrines to Our Lady in England and Wales by someone called H.M. Gillett. And he goes through them, and I didn't count up how many, but there are dozens and dozens of shrines to the Blessed Virgin from the Middle Ages, and he gives a history of all of them, and it's a very valuable resource for someone writing a history of England.
Yeah. Quite incredible to think about that as some kind of like sacred network, especially for people back then where mobility was such a challenge. You know, you just didn't really, you would never really go from London to Birmingham on a whim, for example.
Right.
But if there's a shrine next door, then that really means a lot.
And there were, even during the years of the following the Reformation, particularly when things got a little bit easier for a short while under James, that thousands of people, and of course you went on foot. I mean, I suppose the wealthiest might have gone on by horse, but the majority went on foot. And one of the most popular was in Wales, that people would travel from all over England to Wales. And if you're talking about walking, that's a major endeavour.
Yeah. True. Is that Cardigan?
No, I knew you were going to ask that because I've forgotten now which one it was. It's a Shrine of Our Lady. I have forgotten. I don't have the book to hand either.
Yeah,
so you have
no worries. But that sounds like one that I'll need to check out, because I spoke with Monsignor Armitage actually yesterday, and he was going to tell me about a book he read, which sounds an awful lot like the book you've just described. So I wonder if it's the same one. So
it may well be. I mean, he wrote another one called Famous Shrines to Our Lady of Christendom or something. So there's one that's international as well, but this is the one that's purely about England. He's a convert. H.M. Gillett was a convert. Received at the church sometime around World War II, and these books were written, I think, in shortly after World War II, late 40s, early 50s.
Right. Yeah, they sound good. Right. So you mentioned the Anglican churches. The Anglicans are also, of course, fond of Walsingham. They believe it to be symbolic of the Anglican confession. Is there a question of ownership here between Anglicans and Catholics, or would you perhaps define it in another way?
Well, I'm unabashed in my belief that we are all meant to be one under the See of Peter, and for me, ecumenism is eucomunism. So I make no apologies for that. The devotion to the Blessed Virgin of the Anglican Church was something which arose with the Oxford movement in the 19th century. So it's not something they can claim as a continuum. Realistically and historically,
Right.
and of course, that shrine was avowedly Catholic for 500 years, or 450 or so years and insofar as I see so-called Anglo-Catholicism as a conduit to full conversion, and that, of course, has been the case on many occasions. I have many friends who have eventually crossed the Tiber, and so I just hope that anybody who goes to Walsingham on pilgrimage will be moved closer to the true church.
Right. There's a chap called Father Michael Weir. You may have come across him before. He wrote a book called Walsingham Pilgrims and Pilgrimage. And I arranged to speak with him. And it dawned on me that he was part of the ordinariate, now a Catholic, when he told me that I could call him on his wife's number. So
that's a bit of a giveaway normally, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But
the ordinariate's doing very well over here, actually, in the States. There are many ordinariate parishes, and I rejoice at that. It's a coming home, basically, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so Walsingham's often associated with the joys of Mary, and it's also known for its ruined priory, and of course the history of the Reformation and the dissolution. Would you say that these two things are kind of incongruous or complementary? The joys of Mary and the sort of the reunification of Walsingham, if you will.
Well, I mean, there's no the joys of Mary, of course, because it's associated with the Annunciation, quite rightly. So of course, we think of Walsingham, we think of the joyful mysteries of the Rosary, but the Rosary is incomplete if we only say the joyful mysteries, and there is no resurrection, there's no glorious mystery unless we go via the cross. So of course, it's very appropriate that. And we may even be tempted to see the hand of divine providence in this, that a shrine that for almost half a millennium was something which epitomized the joys of Mary should then pass through a crucifixion and the sorrows of Mary. And of course, what follows that, hopefully, by the grace of God, is the resurrection. And that's, I think, what we need to be hoping for in the third millennium, that Walsingham is a really truly resurrected shrine. And certainly on a microcosmic level, that's been the case. I mean, the restoration of the shrine at the end of the 19th century, and the growth of the shrine following World War II. And every time I return, and I think the last time I did go to England was, I certainly did go to Walsingham. I think it was when I actually recorded that video with KV Turley, that there seem to be more pilgrims than ever going there. So there's it's definitely a place of spiritual renewal and spiritual resurrection. So perhaps we're already beginning to see the beginnings of the glorious phase in the history, almost 1,000 years now, of the shrine of Our Lady of Walsingham. And it would be I honestly believe that if there's going to be a conversion of England, it's going to be via Walsingham.
Right. So because it's so defining and symbolically charged in a sense of English Catholic heart, if you will.
Insofar as we understand who we are as Englishmen, and by the way, but when I talk about Englishmen here, I'm always minded of what Alexander Solzhenitsyn said. He said, when told that Russia was a multi-ethnic country, he said, so who is Russian in such a situation? He said, anyone who feels Russian. So, I actually, for instance, rejoiced that when I was there, it was the national Tamil pilgrimage. And one of the reasons that there were so many people there was because the Tamil pilgrimage is one of the largest. So the resurrection, for me, England is Catholic. And someone living in England who's Catholic actually has more in common with the continuum, which is English culture, than an agnostic or an atheist. So I do believe that the resurrection of England as a Catholic nation is inseparable from the devotion to Our Lady of Walsingham.
Right. Yes, that makes a lot of sense. So there's a great sort of part in the last part of the video where, going back to the runes of Walsingham, you say that the runes speak in a different way, but they speak in the same way as if they were not ruined. And is that kind of going back to this idea of the sorrowful mysteries, the glorious mysteries, being part of the same faith?
Yeah, they're inseparable. The joys, sorrows, and glories of the Rosary, but also the joys, sorrows, and glory of the Christian life are inseparable. That we do have to be reborn in Christ in baptism, but we then have to take up our cross. And it's only through taking up our cross that we attain the kingdom of heaven. So they are completely not inseparable. You can almost see them as being triune, as some sort of image of the Trinity itself. So, of course, when we see the ruins of Walsingham, we're sad, but we're sad in the same way as we see Michelangelo's Pieta when we go into St. Peter's Basilica. You know, it's the sadness of the Mother of God cradling her dead son in her arms. But we know that's not the end of the story. So it's an appropriate sorrow, but it's a sorrow that is seen in context with both the joy and the glory of what the fullness of the Christian faith is.
Right. Yeah. Well said. And just to go back as well to another thing you said, about the Tamil pilgrimages. Now, during the Dowry tour stopped in Preston, and it went to a cathedral there, which is the Syro-Malabar Cathedral. And that kind of took me off guard, because watching the video of the procession going into the church, there's all of this, you know, like Tamil music. It's like very, very wild, very colorful, and very different, I suppose, to I suppose a different expression of faith. And you mentioned in this video with KB Turley that, correct me if I'm wrong here, because I don't want to misquote you, but Our Lady of Walsingham tells us what it means to be Catholic and what it means to be an English Catholic. But it is also something that all people, in a sense, can belong to, because it's, I don't know if you would put it like this, but this is how I would put it. Perhaps a branch connected to the same tree.
Yes, and a unique flower. And I think that it's correct that we should I'm not in favor of a globalist monoculture where we're all wearing the same clothes and purchase from the same global corporations and being allowed to speak in accordance with the whims of big tech. You know, what we need to do is to see every nation as a flowering of a unique culture in the gardens of God. And you know, when I shortly after I was received into the church, I went to World Youth Day with St. John Paul II in Częstochowa in Poland, and you know, it really brought home to me the universality of the Catholic Church. It's the only Catholicity, the only cosmopolitanism which is healthy. It unites all people, but it also, because of the belief in subsidiarity as well as solidarity, doesn't believe that every Catholic has to behave exactly the same way and wear the same clothes. You know, there are some things that unite us, and of course the Eucharist is the most important thing there, and baptism. These things are necessary, and without them, we're not part of that mystical body of Jesus Christ. But once we are part of that mystical body of Jesus Christ, it's quite correct that the roots of our own local cultures should inform the way that we celebrate the truths of faith. So when I was in Częstochowa, I saw there was hundreds of thousands of Spanish there, obviously over 1 million Poles, but people from Italy, from Brazil, from England, from Ireland. And this is the only United Nations I'm interested in. It's the only United Nations that works is the United Nations of faith. So to be English is at one of the same time to be local, in the best sense of the word. You know, something which is unique, one of those unique flowers in the glorious garden of God, but also to be part of that garden and not seeking to wither by becoming disbranched, to use your metaphor.
Yes, yeah. That's, in my mind, the only sort of true diversity as well.
Yes.
So I'm with you on that. So next thing is, I'm just going to go back a little bit. I've written my questions in sequence, but of course, you know, I'm not sort of tying the interview to that sequence at all. How would you characterize English Catholic spirituality?
Well, That's a very good question. But thinking about it, it's certainly connected to the experience of the severance of medieval Christendom and the experience of 300 years of persecution, 150 years of which included martyrdoms. And I think that we can't be fully English Catholics without having a knowledge of, a recognition of, and a devotion to the English martyrs. And certainly a large part of my Catholic spirituality from a very early time, when I realized how much my ancestors had suffered and sacrificed to continue the practice of their faith through 3 whole centuries of essentially secularist persecution. It certainly emboldened me in my faith, encouraged me in my faith, and also allowed me to see a communion with my English Catholic faith with those who suffer under other secularist regimes, such as communism or Nazism. So my Catholic brothers and sisters in China today, for instance, are going through the same secularist persecution that my own ancestors in England suffered. And so for me, that there's a particularity and a universality in being devoted to one's own nation's martyrs, but seeing in that a communion with the nation, with the martyrs of all nations.
Yes, yeah. I understand that. For me, I'm particularly, one story I keep going back to is the story of Edmund Campion, because I just find him a very inspiring figure. His writing as well is really profound, really beautiful. In fact, his writing, I'd say also some of his speeches that were recorded, I believe. But yes, if I'm not wrong, when you were speaking with KV Turley, you spoke about secular fundamentalism, and that was in the wake of speaking about the martyrdoms in England. The idea of the state lashing out against the church. And I wanted to ask, what do you really mean by this term secular fundamentalism? And how does and how did Walsingham kind of stand contra to it in history?
Well, basically, you know, the whole of history, my next book that I'm going to begin writing soon, I've tentatively entitled The Good, the Bad, and the Beautiful, A History in 3 Dimensions. And basically, the whole tapestry of human history is rooted in the goodness, homo viator, man on a journey, the pilgrim man, and then homo superbus, proud man, and then anthropos, he who looks up in wonder, so beauty. So Pope Benedict said that in the final analysis, the only defense for the Catholic faith are the saints that she's inspired and the great art that's been produced from her womb. So in other words, goodness and beauty are the key marks of the history of the church. So the point is that ultimately the fight between good and evil, which Solzhenitsyn says takes place in the heart of every man. So it's not something which starts with ourselves and spreads out into community. That battle between good and evil is the defining characteristic of human history. So the battle between homo viator and homo superbus. So most manifestations of evil are actually secularist. Now, you know, in the so-called ages of faith, that they may have employed religious trappings to justify the secularism, but the motivation was basically secularism. That the Anglican Church, when it was founded as a state church, as a state religion, with the secular ruler as its head, and the martyrs were not put to death for heresy. In other words, for being not true to religion, but for treason. In other words, for betraying the state. So to be a Catholic meant you're a traitor to the secular state. So this war between Christianity, between Christendom and secularism, is perennial. It takes place in every generation, manifests itself in different ways, but philosophically speaking, that's accidental. You know, substantially, every generation fights the same battle between Caesar and Christ.
Right. Yes. I can remember now you mentioned Herod and Pontius Pilate as well as being examples of secularism.
Yes.
Okay, so now, okay, so just to go back a little bit, you lived in Norwich for a time, and a few people have mentioned something along these lines, but Walsingham as a place is often described as being kind of small and out of the way. And I wanted to ask, because you've compared it to Lourdes and Fatima, and you've contrasted it to these cities like London, or sorry, it was Lisbon and Paris, what does the smallness of Walsingham add to it? What does that signify?
Well, at the moment, it really encapsulates some of the most beautiful things. You know, in The Last Battle, the final book of C.S. Lewis's Chronicles of Narnia, the divine and delightful Lucy, you know, the one who has light, the one who sees, says that in our world too, something was contained in a stable larger than the world itself. In other words, the Christ child. So there's something Shire-like. I mean, I've written a lot of work. I've mentioned Lewis, now mentioning Tolkien. You know, that there's something quintessentially beautiful about something as big as the Marian apparition at Walsingham and the history of Walsingham and its importance to Christendom, and the sort of almost quaint village-like feel of the place. It's like, in fact, I have a friend of mine who's an atheist, who was with me when I did that interview with KV Turley in Walsingham, and I actually said to him, you know, this is not going to be your thing, being stuck in the Marian shrine all day. And he's into biology, and I said, if you go up the road there 15 miles to Blakeney Point, you can see seals on the beach and what have you. And for whatever reason, he said, no, I think I'll hang out here. And he said, he's a great Lord of the Rings fan too, and he said at the end of the day, it felt as if he had gone to Lothlorien. You know, he got this sort of, it entered some sort of elvish kingdom.
Yeah.
And I think that, you know, that will be lost if Walsingham really takes off and it's full of souvenir shops and it looks like Lourdes and Rome and what have you.
Yeah.
It's a price, of course, we have to pray for, because obviously it will reflect a growth in Marian devotion. But until we get to that time, let's enjoy this sort of almost elvish, hobbit-like, Shire-like beauty of this English village that palpitates with the heart of Mary. And so I love going back there for that reason. So it's a bit like Doctor Who. We're moving to really strange metaphors now, but it's a bit like the TARDIS. You know, it's small on the outside, but when you go inside, you realize you're entering something magnificent.
Right. Yeah, I'm not so familiar with Doctor Who. Is that the phone box?
Yes.
Yeah.
TARDIS is this spaceship, a time machine spaceship, and it's just a little phone box on the outside. You go in, and it's, of course, huge. So.
Yeah. It reminds me of in Wales. There's apparently the smallest museum in the world. It's in a phone box. So there's something of that in Wales too.
Bury St Edmunds boasts the smallest pub in the world, and it's appropriately called the Nutshell, and I've had a pint there.
Yeah, gosh, I miss having pints at pubs, I'll tell you that.
Oh, me too. There's nothing like English ale in an English pub.
Yeah.
As they've been closed all year anyway, we're not missing much at the moment, right?
Yeah, exactly. Right, and so Walsingham's also become recently well known for these online masses that they've been providing. Of course, the rededication ceremony was hosted online. But I wanted to ask, is there something to be gained by being sort of quote unquote on site in Walsingham, as it were?
Yeah, I mean, I make no bones about the fact that I'm a neo-Luddite and a techno-minimalist. So there's nothing like incarnating things, living in reality and not virtual reality. I would say, however, that we did log in live for the rededications. We were able, through the power of the internet, to actually be there in some sense for the rededication. But generally speaking, the whole point about pilgrimage is, you know, we live in a world where faith is incarnated. In the person of Jesus, but also the sacraments of baptism and the Eucharist, and that's why relics are substantial. not accidental, they have real power, and why places have real power. And
Yes.
so places of pilgrimage that, if you like, have been sanctified by hundreds of years of devotion are special places that have a sanctity, and that sanctity is not in the imagination. That sanctity is incarnated in reality.
Yes, good. I'm saying good because I've got another similar question. I think that leads quite well onto it, and that's just about your quote in of course, the conversation with Turley, and that's Walsingham is partaking of eternity. This place as a Marian shrine exists, if you like, in a place which is beyond the place itself. And I was wondering if you could unpack that statement a little, and what is this place beyond the place of Walsingham that you're speaking of?
Well, I think that probably the best way I can express that is that the divine attribute of God that we sometimes don't understand fully is his omnipresence. When we talk about God's omnipresence, we usually think, or at least I always used to think, of the fact that he's present everywhere, that there's nowhere that he isn't. But I think in a deeper sense, it means that everything is present to him. In other words, there's no past and there's no future for God. Everything is present to him. And I think, like, again, going back to C.S. Lewis, like walking through the wardrobe, that when we go to a sacred space, such as any Catholic church where the real presence is in the tabernacle, or such as a major pilgrimage site like Walsingham, that we are somehow entering into a deeper engagement with that omnipresence of God, that somehow or other we've gone further up and further in, to keep going back to Lewis, that we actually be engaging on a deeper level with that which is really there.
Yeah, great. I think the word place has come up a lot in my research so far, and it will be a fundamental aspect of my thesis, is this idea of creating places. And places, I think you can contrast them with spaces. One is inscribed with meaning, the other isn't really. It's open to it, but it isn't.
I like that. That. I'll steal that, James.
Sure thing.
I think it was T.S. Eliot that said that bad writers borrow, but good writers steal.
well, yeah, there's nothing new under the sun, and I can tell you that I stole that idea myself.
There we are.
There's, I think you might well like this. There's a book called A Christian Theology of Place by an Anglo-Catholic vicar called John Ing, and I think it's really good because he writes a lot about place, people seeking places as a response to the isolating effects of modernity and globalization. People seek rootedness, and that, I think, was something that really spoke to me.
I would completely agree, except I think that it's bigger than that. In other words, that Walsingham was an important place before modernity came along. So I think on a more fundamental level, that the theology of place, perhaps to give it a name, is connected with this being a vale of tears and a land of exile. That sacred places become, if you like, keyholes that give us some sort of entry into something that feels more like home than the land of exile in which we find ourselves. Now, I agree completely that modernity in many ways has exacerbated that sense of exile and alienation, but it's always there because this is not our true home. So I think sacred places give us an inkling of that true home, which is, of course, to be in God's divine presence for eternity.
Yes, yeah. That's a good point. I mentioned briefly there was one guy I was reading called Robert Orsi who wrote History and Presence. And one thing I don't want to do is describe Walsingham as being a kind of reaction against modernity, people trying to find roots somewhere, because that would completely diminish the role and the agency of the Virgin Mary. That would make it sound more like just a social phenomenon rather than...
It would also be very much an oversimplification, as the destruction of Walsingham was a consequence of modernity.
Yeah.
That when what is called the early modern period really is connected to both to the Reformation, which was lay the foundations for the so-called Enlightenment. So Walsingham was destroyed by modernity, in fact, and its resurrection is something which shows that it transcends modernity.
Right. Yes. Right. Excuse me. I'm just trying to find the next best question to go
Oh,
with.
no problem. I'm not in a hurry. So this is just this recording is just for your own use, right?
Yeah, it is. I mean, with your permission, of course. I was thinking of putting it on my LinkedIn profile. And
Absolutely. Well,
yeah,
actually, I'm talking about permit. You absolutely have my permission. You can do what you like with this. I'm not.
yeah,
I have no proprietary claims upon it.
yeah.
But I was going to ask your permission at whatever time, if you give it, at
Hmm.
whatever time you think is appropriate. I would actually like to put this whole interview up on my own website, and perhaps as it's not public, I'll put it behind the paywall of my website, which means that it's not published in a public space. But if you'd be happy with that, and you send me the file or the link or whatever, the link might be easier from my perspective. But whatever works for you, I'd be honoured if you'd let me do that, because there's lots of good, meaty. Theological and spiritual things we're discussing here, which I would like to share with the people that subscribe to my website, if you don't mind.
Yeah, absolutely. That would be absolutely fine. And so it's something that I mentioned in my email to you previously, is that this is my thesis. I think one of my goals really is to be able to explain Catholic heritage within my field in a way that does it justice. Because of course, not only am I a heritage practitioner, but I'm also a Catholic, and this is what really drives me. And so this is a project that interests me, but I view it as having some good practical application in the future. Um, as you well know, the process of research helps you to learn a lot as well, not just for the sake of a publication, but for yourself as well.
Yeah, and I think you're doing something really important here, because I think that what we need is for you to show that it's necessary to have an empathetic approach to places, to heritage sites. In other words, you have to see why they're important through the eyes of those who think they're important, rather than to step back with some sort of so-called objectivity, which is really a mask normally for cynicism, and sort of see it merely as some sort of sociological phenomenon that's explainable and explicable and explainable away in terms of materialism. I think you could, irrespective of your own religious beliefs, I think you could claim that we don't understand these places unless we can be empathetic and see why they're important to people in their own terms, and
Yes.
not in our so-called detached and really prejudiced perspective.
Yes. Yeah. 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 I'm with you there.
Let me explain, by the way, just very
Yeah, go
briefly,
ahead.
what because this is a large part of my own approach to literary criticism, which is my field. My second book on Shakespeare is called Through Shakespeare's Eyes. My argument is that, irrespective of whether, whatever your own beliefs are, that seeing a work of literature through the eyes of the person who wrote it has an authorial objectivity, and therefore an authorial authority that transcends your subjective approach to it and the subjective approach of the critics, however good they might be. In other words, understanding where the author's coming from is the right place to start,
Yeah.
regardless of your own beliefs.
Yeah. 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 That makes a lot of sense. Sounds a lot. I can understand how you would get that from Shakespeare as well. Um, and yeah, I'm going to send you a link to that book, History and Presence, just because I think it's an interesting read. What it basically goes through is that this idea of objectivity in discussing history and culture is often just, I suppose, a sort of secularized Protestantism, where the sacred and the idea of God is that God is sort of absent in history rather than present. So I think it's an interesting book, and I'm hoping to use
Yes.
it well.
Yeah, do send me the link, because
Yeah.
that might be something I'd be interested in reading myself, and I might get hold of it. So yeah.
Great. So the next thing is um, right. You've taken groups of pilgrims to Walsingham with Turley again. How does Walsingham tend to be received by these groups?
Yeah, I've been there. I think probably I've led three separate pilgrimages from the United States to Walsingham over the years, and I find that the spirituality of the place and the presence of God and the presence of the Virgin at the place is contagious. That people who knew little or nothing about Walsingham before they arrive end up being having a great devotion to Our Lady of Walsingham, having been there. So it's a place that has a power that transcends national culture, because these people, if you bring a group of Americans over, ethnically, they're going to be from all sorts of places. And for the most part, if they're Catholics, not actually WASPs, not white Anglo-Saxon Protestants. They're more likely to be Polish or Irish, Czech, just about anywhere, Italian. So this does speak to the universality of the power of Walsingham as a sacred place. I'm now using the word place and not space, thanks to your honing my definitions. That it does show that, again, that's the power of the church to be both local and universal at the same time.
Right. Okay. Sure. So the rededication in 2020, was that something you were involved in?
No, only as someone who was rejoicing at the process, and as I said, we as a family, we set up what we were doing during. Thankfully, in this part of the world, South Carolina, we were only fully shut down for about 6 weeks, and that was right at the very beginning. And other than that, we basically mass has been going ahead and what have you. But there was that period, and I think that the rededication was close to the Annunciation, right? It was actually during that 6-week period. Yeah, it was either on the Feast of the Annunciation itself or within a few days, if I remember correctly. So what we were doing for Mass when we couldn't go to Mass is setting up a sort of a makeshift shrine, draped, and putting the perversely perhaps the laptop on top there, because that's where you're participating in the Mass. So we did the same thing for the rededication. We actually we made it something which was going to be going to the service of rededication as far as we were able. And again, thanks be to God, because of the internet, we didn't have to fly to Walsingham, because that would not have been possible.
Yeah, right, exactly. And now just moving on to this upcoming book, Faith of Our Fathers, A History of True England. What do you mean by true England?
Well, that England which is true to the truth. In other words, taking as my starting point a belief that God became man in Jesus Christ, and that Jesus Christ established the church, and that church is the Catholic Church. That true England is the England that's been true to that reality, to that absolute reality which we see incarnated in the mystical body of Christ, the Catholic Church. So it's a history from the arrival of the first Christian missionaries, which I think is normally dated around 63 AD. So within 20 years of the crucifixion, right through to the 21st century. In fact, I think that the rededication of England to Our Lady of Walsingham might have been the sort of concluding of the book.
Right. Okay. Good. So coming right up to the present, really. Yes. It's interesting that you use the phrase "absolute reality," because I think, to be honest, as a heritage practitioner as well, I believe that the history of true England is the history of Catholic England, and but in terms of putting it in a heritage sense, and in terms of justifying that to someone who would say, well, England is also a Protestant country, and that's essentially what England is. Eliade has something I think quite interesting to say about that, because Messiah Eliade in The Sacred and Profane describes the eruption of the sacred in history as like a manifestation of those words you use, absolute reality. So if anyone can say something is true, it's God, ultimately. And so
Yeah,
God
but
has,
I would say that that the word "true" in the title is an adjective. In other words, that there's also a history of England which has been untrue.
mm,
So all I'm saying is that this is a history of true England, not England, which is that any other England is not England, but any other England is false in terms of its relationship with reality.
mm,
So of course, England, like all nations, like anything which is made a community of human persons, is going to be a mixture of good, bad, ugly, and beautiful. But my book was unabashedly looking at the history of true England. That thread, which for a large part of the history was not just a thread, but actually the cord, that the heart that held the whole thing together for 1500 years. I mean, at the time of the Reformation, there was the so-called Reformation. There was no desire for Reformation in England. I mean, the number of Protestants were minuscule. Now,
mm,
Luther would never have taken off in England. It was Henry VIII's secular revolution against the church, which caused the 300 years of persecution. And for me, that period of crucifixion of 300 years of England is its most glorious time. You can say in many respects, what's the most glorious thing about the life of Jesus Christ? And you could, of course, say the resurrection. You could say the ascension. But surely, I mean, the most popular image we have in churches above the altar is the crucifixion,
mm,
because that's glorious in the sense that it's that act of dying for us, obviously connected to the resurrection, which redeems us.
mm,
So for me, the most glorious part of English history is the 300 years when the church is being crucified.
mm-hmm. Yes, yes. Um, okay. And what did England lose by, generally speaking, losing its Catholic faith? What does it stand to regain?
Well, it's become, of course, a miserable place. If you look at the beliefs that replace authentic Christianity, they've been one sort of miserable, materialistic response after another, leading in the inexorable direction of nihilism, which is basically where we're at now. And you can see it made manifest in the life of the people of England, particularly in the cities. England is a miserable place now, and the only way that England will rediscover and rekindle that sense of joy, which is essential for fulfilling human life, is to rediscover the source of joy, who is Jesus Christ.
Yes, right. And we have seen some of this misery and anxiety and uncertainty in the world, last few years. And how can the spirituality of Walsingham help us to face the struggle of life, really?
Well, I think that all these sacred places, and Walsingham is certainly one of the most sacred, are like candles in the darkness.
Mm,
And that as long as they are there, the darker it gets elsewhere, the more they will become attractive
mm,
uh, as places that are places of refuge from the increasing nihilistic despair that's all that's left once you remove Christ from the heart, whether that's the heart of a human person or the heart of a human community. So all we have to do, I think, as Christians, is to be those candles in the dark. So we have to grow in holiness by the grace of God, that we can be candles in darkness to everybody that we meet. But sacred places like Walsingham, if you like, are larger flames that beacons, if you like, that are going to be places of refuge when things get darker and more dire, more desperate.
yes. Okay. Um, and this is a little bit more of a hypothetical one. How do you imagine the heritage of Walsingham being sustained into the future? How do you imagine Walsingham looking in 50, 100, 200 years?
Well, God the Walsingham in 50 or 100 years from now is already in God's omnipresence. It's in safe hands. I don't want to play the prophet because I'm bound to be wrong. But all I would say is that that the nature of the human person is that we are not going to descend to a primeval soup of either the demonic or the bestial, because we are neither demons nor beasts. And then when things get sufficiently bad, there will be a recoil of the heart towards the heart's home, and the hearth and home, which is Jesus Christ. So in times of darkness, it's all the more important that those who are keeping the flame burning do so with courage, and do so with vigilance and diligence, and I think that's what we're called to. In other words, in times of darkness, we need to be like the martyrs. We need to have the courage necessary to carry the flame as it gets darker and darker and darker, so that eventually it blazes up again. And that's what happened in England, of course, with the Second Spring, with the conversion of John Henry Newman, and also with the immigration of the Irish. All of a sudden there was a Catholic presence once again in England, when it would have been safely predicted by prophets, which is why I'm try not to become too much of one, but in 1800, people would have safely assumed that the Catholic Church was now, to all intents and purposes, dead and buried, except for a few eccentrics living in the countryside. Whereas, of course, 50 years after that, with the re-establishment of the hierarchy and the conversion of Newman and Manning and others, all of a sudden the church is growing exponentially. And those figures, which I cover in my book, of the growth in a number of Catholic churches, number of people practicing the faith, Catholic schools, the number of people attending Catholic schools, it was an exponential growth for a period of about 100 years. So whenever it's safely predicted by those forces of secularism that Christ has been defeated, we can safely prophesy resurrection.
Great. Okay. That's a really great place to end the interview on. And thank you so much for your time in answering these questions. Also, I wanted to say thanks a lot for what you do, Joseph. I think English Catholic history has been suppressed in many ways. It's been sidelined. And I think what you do is so important and vital for people to be able to get a sense of their history again. We need people who will recount the deeds of the past and recount these stories. So thanks a lot. It's really inspiring reading your stuff. And
well, my pleasure, James. It's very encouraging for me to obviously hear that my work is being received in the way you say, but also and especially when it's being received by young Englishmen. Because although I'm living over here, but both of us are living in exile, that I see myself as an Englishman, and obviously my heart is always warmed by encounters with the younger generation of English people who are on fire for the faith. So just having this conversation with you it'd be good for the cockles of my heart. So thank you.
Great to hear. Yeah. I'll be sending you a thesis, just for your interest.
I'd love to see it and read it. You bet. Yeah.
Great. So probably next few months, something like that.
Wonderful. And whenever you think the timing is ripe and you're happy with it, send me the link to this interview, and I'll post it. It will be on the subscribers part of the site. So it won't be publicly available. But if you're happy with that, when you're ready, if you send me the link, I'll be very grateful.
Great. Yeah, that sounds good. So so yeah, cheers, Joseph, and all the best. And God bless you, your family over there.
And, thank you. And you'll be in my daily prayers as you approach the threshold. I'll be praying for you and your wife and your family. Please stay in touch.
Yeah, cheers. Will do.
Okay.
And look forward to reading that book of yours that's coming out too.
Yeah, coming out in November. So yeah, I'd be interested to see what you think of it when you've had the chance to give it a read.
Yeah, look forward to that. Cheers, Joseph.
Thanks, James. God bless. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye now.